So one of the things I want you all to do before we even dive in, I want you all to think about the team that you're working on in or the organization that you're working in, and think about a song that comes to mind. And think about why that song came to mind to you that best describes the team or organization that you're working in right now. And if you can remember the name of the song, and if you can remember the name of the artist,
Mhm.
put it into the chat.
Mhm.
If you can't think of the if you can't think of the artist, if you can't think of the name of the song, don't worry. Get that melody or the tune in your head. Feel free to bob along as you think of some of the lyrics to it.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, one love. Some good ones coming. I'm not a dancer, but y'all make me start moving. So this is cool. Beautiful. So I wanted to share that with you all, and you can keep typing if something comes to mind at any point. I wanted to share that with you all because it's actually one of the tools that I'll often use with teams just to kind of get them into a certain mood, a certain vibe. And it also kind of describes where the teams are at a certain point. And it sometimes it might be aspirational, but it gives everybody a little bit of glimpse of where we are. I've often said or offered up to the teams to say, hey, okay, we got a list of songs now. We got an album. We have a playlist, and it becomes the team's playlist. So that's one of those tools that kind of helps to soften, to helps kind of reveal, to helps kind of give us an idea of where we are. So I throw that out to you all because it's kind of like this is another one of those spoilers, right? We got a theme going on. This is kind of what we'll be talking about over the next several minutes is this moment of teams and as they go through different motions, and what are some of the tools that can be used as they're going through these different motions. What does it look like as they're going through these different motions, and and perhaps what are some of the strategies, at least that I've used in the past, and perhaps from you all, you have used some others too, and hopefully we can share with each other some of those things. So actually, I should probably start sharing my screen. Let me give that a shot. Uh-oh. Kimmy Godwin, I don't have the ability to share. Can you all authorize that for me?
Yeah, hold on. Let me. No, now I can just make him a co-host. Cami, can you do it?
I think you have the right.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just make him a co-host.
Okay.
There you go, Cami.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. If you can't see the screen, please let me know. Hey, so here's what I'd like to do as we dive into the material. If anybody has any questions, I think what I'd love to do is, as we go through, please type them into the chat. I'm going to try to stop maybe 7 to 10 minutes before our end time, and I'll just go scroll back up to the top and start answering as many questions as possible as we go through it. So topic: coaching patterns for navigating, forming, storming, norming, and performing. A little bit about me. So I've been doing agile coaching for about 14 years or so, and before that, during that, my background is in IT as a software developer. That's kind of where I've gotten my chops, and recently been exploring the world of systems and relationship coaching. And I think that's a really important thing to talk about, because what I've found, particularly over the last several years, is that a lot of the practices in agility, they get us so far, and there's another little chasm to cross. At least it was for me, where I discovered there's more than just the hardcore practices that are needed in order for us to be successful, no matter what we're trying to do. And it's oftentimes how do we relate to each other? How do we work with each other? And a lot of the systems and relationship coaching that I've been exploring over the past several years has been incredibly important on that note. And I think that's something for us to explore for the rest of our time together. There'll be shades of it at least. So one of the things I want to just acknowledge, this stuff is hard. This stuff is really, really hard. So I think it's really important to normalize that. So in the case that you're feel like you're hitting your head against the wall some days, and you're puzzled and trying to figure out why isn't this working? What's going on? I just again just want to normalize that this is really, really hard stuff that we're all trying to do. Trying to get the high performing across sometimes really large organizations or even really small ones. Uh, this idea of constantly trying to be an improvement, trying to build really awesome cultures, and then oh by the way, we get thrust into pandemics, worldwide pandemics, and political upheaval, and so that oftentimes will turn our worlds upside down as well. And then all of us as individuals go through things. So I think it's important just to normalize that this is really, really hard stuff. And what we'll talk about for the rest of our time is at least some stuff that can help move us forward as we go along. So all of this work is built upon Bruce Tuckman's work. And his idea was that every single team goes through these four emotions of forming, then they go through storming, norming, and performing. And that's kind of the frame of what this talk is about today. And we'll go through each of these motions, each of these steps, and talk about what does it look like? What does it typically look like, at least from my experience? And it'd be great to hear what you all experience as well. And then talk about some ways to move from one step to the next. We'll talk about a couple of different tools that I've seen that are helpful in each one of these steps, and then I'll try to drill in on one or two tools for each of these steps that I think it's worth looking at and perhaps could be helpful in your day-to-day lives. And then, like I said, I'll try to end 10 minutes early. Godwin, can we make sure I'm on track? So our end time is at 12:45, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'll try to end somewhere around 12:35 and just and go through as many questions as possible. And then I'll make sure my contact information is out there just in case there are other questions. So I think every single team, no matter how great they are, they go through these steps. This is one of my favorite great teams right now. I'm still in my geek mode. I'll always be in my geek mode of the comic books and movies. There's that theme again of coming attractions. So even the Avengers goes through these different steps, right? This idea of forming and storming, norming, and then performing. And here's the thing that Bruce Tuckman offered to us with this particular model: no team gets to skip a step. I think the interesting thing is how long you stay in a particular step, how quickly you get to progress from one step to the other, but there's no skipping. I've not seen that. His work says he hasn't seen it. So at least anecdotally from there, it seems to be true. So again, we're going to talk about what does it look like within each one of these steps? How do you progress through each one of them? So let's talk about forming. So there comes a time, and another harkening back to comic books. I'm a real big comic book fan. So one of the things that I love is the idea of origin stories. How do we begin? How do we start? And oftentimes, at least for me, when I see teams or organizations just starting, it seems to be just tons and tons of questions. And I would invite you to kind of think about the team that you're on, the organization that you're on, whether or not you first started there or you were part of the origin of that particular team. Think about the mode that you were in when that occurred. I know for me, I just had a lot of questions. I actually just joined a new organization. I just started coaching with a new organization with a bunch of different coaches. And I found myself for the first couple of weeks, even now, 6 weeks into it, still kind of in this forming mode, still kind of having these questions like, who am I, at least on this team? Who is this team? What do we stand for? What is our purpose? What are we supposed to do? What's kind of our North Star of what we're trying to do? And oh, by the way, what are the rules? Because I don't want to break any, or when I do break some, I want to know that. So I find that a lot of teams and individuals they get into this kind of question mode, really trying to understand where are we, and who are we. So a couple of tools around that I've seen really helpful is take the time, make the investment, define what the purpose of the team is. What are we trying to do? What's our vision for this particular team or for this particular organization? And assuming that you're building a product or something, how does that match up? How do they align? How does the purpose of the particular team that you're on or organization, how does that align with the product that you're trying to actually build? As part of that, being able to define how we work together. What are the agreements that we have? Things around, when are we going to meet? How often do we meet? What are the tools that we use when we do get together? And even what are the different meetings? Just some real basic level stuff, because what that does is it eliminates more of the confusion. It gets those questions that we just talked about when you're typically in forming mode. It gets them answered. And so if we can eliminate a lot of those things, a magical thing happens, comfort happens, trust begins to form. People begin to understand where they're trying to go to, what they're trying to do, and it becomes a lot easier in their daily lives. Right? This is all about agility. So being able to figure out, well, how do we reflect as a team and how we're working together? How do we do that? Oftentimes, that becomes the retrospective, but sometimes, even daily, we need to be able to do that. But having the team be able to intentionally be able to say, how do we take a pause and be able to say, how do we get better? And then one place that I spend a ton of time with, as a coach, is on roles. Being able to understand within a particular team who's who can do what, who will do what. So being able to kind of, again, intentionally define the roles within the team becomes really important. I do a lot of work here with different exercise, and just being able to talk to a team and say, what are our roles? Who does what, and what are we missing? And it becomes a really interesting exercise when teams get to take a pause and be able to say, what skills are we missing and how will we fulfill them? And that helps to get us even closer to this idea of a more cross-functional team. But being able to kind of really identify those areas becomes really important. So that's kind of that's forming. And I want to shift over now into storming. But one of the things I want to throw out is being able to recognize how you can move from forming to storming. I think there are a couple of really important things that I tend to see. One is just what we were talking about, that roles emerge. And folks are able to look around and go, you know what? Godwin's really good at this. And he's made a commitment that the team can depend on him for this particular role or this particular skill. And he's also said, hey, I'm willing to shift too. And then work actually begins. We're able to actually look at the work, identify the work, and be able to focus in on those things until we need to improve, until we take our time to say, how can we do that better? So on that particular note, I talked a little bit about having team agreements. one of the exercises I really like when forming a team, one of the first things that I tend to do is this particular exercise. And there's different versions, there are different forms of it, but at the essence, I like to ask these two questions and write down how the team responds. It can be, short phrases or words, but really trying to capture just like the essence of how we're going to work together. How do we want to be in relationship with each other? And it might sound a little foo-foo, but the idea is, how do we want to work together? What's the kind of environment that we want to create with each other? And so you'll often hear, we want to learn with each other. We want to be curious with each other. We want to have fun with each other. We want to build with each other. And then the other part of it is, how will we hold each other accountable? So once we've described this wonderful world, this wonderful working world that we want to build, how will we hold each other accountable to that? And it really is that. It's an accountability. It's an ability for each individual to look at each other and say, you can depend on me to hold up what we just talked about. And at any moment, we can go around and justify exactly that. So storming, we got that going on. Every team goes through it. Again, the idea is, how long will you stay in this particular mode? Just much like what we talked about in forming. And so some of the things that I tend to see when teams are storming is this kind of like really edgy behavior. Because one of the things that typically happens is that you're everyone's starting at one primary place, and we're trying to cross an edge effectively to somewhere that we want to be. So think about scaling a mountain, and there's the top of the mountain, and we want to get over top of that, and that top of the mountain and trying to get up to it can be a heavy lift. It can be pretty hard. And so some of the behavior that I tend to see is confusion, and maybe there's sometimes lack of participation. There can be some contentiousness. Folks are just kind of groaning, and not really happy about how things are happening. And so I think, as someone who's on the team, whose responsibility, like a scrum master or a coach or any leader, being able to recognize those things becomes really important, to understand we're kind of in a storming phase, and normalizing that is just that. It's normal. It's something that all teams go through, but now we want to focus in on. Now we want to be intentional about what are the reasons around that, and how do we get to the next phase. So providing clarity becomes a really, really important thing. Understanding perhaps what roles were we wrong about or are still missing becomes a really, really important conversation there. But again, I think the big focus first is being able to recognize that you're actually in it. You're in this particular phase of storming. So a couple of things that I've seen really important as far as helping to get through the storming phase is, I like this exercise that I got hip to, called the dumpster drop of challenges, where, at least when we were still seeing each other face to face, I'd carry around a trash can and say, what are the things that we need to let go of? What are the challenges that may have existed before, but now it's time to let go of? And it becomes this symbolic exercise of being able to say that we can actually let go of certain things, and that we can actually move to a different place. So I know out in the agile verse now, a lot of us are getting hip to this idea of psychological safety, as we should be. And I was a really big fan of the work that Google did. And one of the articles, it was a really good Harvard Business Review article that I read on their work. And one of the points really struck me, where the author, Paul Santagata, he talked about this ability of being able to talk human to human. It also reminded me of this book that I read a long time ago called Ubuntu, where there's just this ability to connect with people, humans, because recognizing that you know Lizette and I share this idea with each other. We like a particular sport. Maybe we both like soccer a whole lot, and it's just being able to connect to somebody at a human on a human level, and being able to recognize that while we may have disagreements about this thing or that thing, we at least have something to connect to, and it actually becomes the ground conditions for alignment. And in this idea, the thought is that there are some higher level things, higher level goals or ambitions that we can actually connect to at the team level or organizational level, and that while we may disagree in the details, there is certainly this vision or this north star at least that we can all align to, and that typically takes us through the day. It takes us through long term, is aligning around these goals and north star. And then when there is conflict, we want to have very intentional conversations about how do we want to be. What are the different practices, and how do we want to seat ourselves when we are in conflict, when it happens. Again, it's another one of those normalizing things that when groups work together, when teams work together, when there's an organization made up of human beings, there will be disagreements, there will be conflict. We should recognize that, we should embrace it, and be able to use conflict as a way of knowing that something's trying to happen. And we want to put that out on the table and be able to discuss it in a constructive way. So this is not a time to push it away, to repress it. It's to say, whoa, that's fascinating. Something's happening here. There's conflict, there's disagreement. Cool. How can we use that? And one of the things that, I think it becomes really, really instructive is creating the environment such that all voices are heard in all of those different things. We get to hear from people why they feel the way that they do, why they're thinking the way that they are. What can we learn from that so that we can all improve? I'm a big believer in this idea of creative tension. I think when tension happens, the really cool stuff can happen as a result of it. This is where the innovation, this is when the real creativity happens. But I think the real magic around that is creating the environment such that stuff can be really constructive even when it happens. We can get in good debates, good rich debates about something, and then the output of that is, well, what did we learn? What should we do? What's the net of that? How should we proceed? Those are really awesome, really beautiful conversations. And so I think they actually become the good ground conditions, knowing that you can kind of exit storming and now start getting into this more norming state. So a couple other things around tools that I've seen really helpful um, around storming is, again, being able to recognize that certain things are happening and certain behaviors are happening. And so I learned about this idea of toxins that show up for us as individuals. They show up, the team as a whole can exhibit these toxins, and what you see here on the screen are four of the most prominent ones. And so they actually come to us from John Gottman. He and his wife spent a lot of time, mostly with married couples and relationships, and being able to look to see where these toxins show up. And they found actually that how large or how often they showed up was a predictor of how successful the relationship could be. And so there was also this idea of, um, everybody exhibits these toxins at one point or time. The real trick is, how to make them as less frequent and as small as possible, and be able to recognize when they show up and what we can do as far as antidotes. And I want to show you some of the antidotes around some of these toxins. I think the big superpower here is recognizing that they're showing up for you as an individual, you as a team, and then how to inject the antidote as quickly as possible. and be able to inject more positivity. Like there's a nice ratio that they talk about, which is you want to have at least 5 positive encounters with someone for every one not so positive or negative interaction that you have. So just taking a look at a couple of antidotes. One is this benign beginning, or the kind of like this soft beginning that you can have. And this would be, just to go back a second, this would be the antidote for criticism. Just being able to express things from your own point of view, and as opposed to someone else's view. I have some concerns about a certain thing. I need to do this. So being able to inject this I word as opposed to here's what you did, pointing that finger at someone, taking a little bit more responsibility and recognizing what you brought to the situation can be a nice little antidote there. So again, going back for a second, contempt, and the antidote there is building cultural appreciation. This is again that human to human kind of conversation. So instead of injecting the negativity and different kinds of slights to someone, being able to speak from yourself and what you're actually missing, and being able to express that to someone else and what you need out of a situation tends to make things a lot more productive. So going down to the bottom left, take responsibility. This is the antidote for defensiveness. And in this way, defensiveness tends to be, someone, saying, "Here's why I did it." Oftentimes, you see that show up as excuses. The antidote here being accepting the other person's perspective, figuring out what could be true about what I hear. We often see defensiveness being the opposite pair to criticism. And again, being able to say, "Here's what I need out of the situation. Here's what I didn't like." And taking some accountability there and some responsibility. And then lastly, psychological self-soothing. This would be the antidote for stonewalling. And the idea here is being able to understand that you can take a break and be able to respond to the other person. "I need a break, but here's when I will come back to address this." And each person is going to find their own special way in order to psychologically self-soothe, to get them back into the moment where they can re-engage, and not completely stonewall, not completely run away and not address the issue. Okay, so what happens when a team norms? And we've gone from forming to storming, and now hopefully we want to get to some norming here. So hopefully what starts to happen is clarity starts to show up. Things become a lot more clear, particularly the rules, the roles, how we're going to work together. We've written them down, and at the time we wrote them down in that team agreement, they felt very aspirational. But now they're starting to feel like, what, we're actually starting to, I actually feel it. I see it every single day. And here's some examples of how I see it and feel it every single day. And you start seeing that team members are helping each other. They're starting to say things like, "I need some help." You start to hear, like at a daily scrum, you start to hear, "Hey, I'm in the weeds. I can't figure this thing out. I need help." Asking for help is an incredible sign of trust. It shows a little bit of vulnerability there. It says that I trust my teammates enough to say out in the open that I need some help, I'm stuck, and that someone says willingly, "Dude, I got you. Let's sit down. Let's help each other through this particular problem because I've seen it too before, or I've never seen this problem, but it's our problem. Let's help each other." So I got up to this idea of trust and what it looks like and a couple of characteristics around it. And as you can see there, those are some that I've seen to start really think about it in a much less abstract or esoteric way of trust. You start to see things like empathy. You start to see people be more transparent. You start to see competence growing and communication. And oftentimes, what the other side of that is, those things making up what trust means. They're actually in an order. In order to build trust, the first thing I tend to need is empathy, and then I need transparency. So interestingly enough, competence and communication fall a little bit lower on the list there. So let's look at a couple of tools for norming. So one is, everybody gets triggered. It's just a matter of how quickly that you recognize it. And it could be a particular event, it could be, just a concept. But everybody has triggers. It's going to be important to understand what are those triggers. And by the way, teams get triggered. And being able to understand what are the things that kind of really knock us off track. What are the things that get us really distracted or set us into this mode where we exhibit a lot of those toxins that we just talked about? And so being able to identify them and everybody understands them, it automatically creates this awesome awareness. And awareness becomes like this real superpower. Once you're aware of something that's going on, then you can start thinking about how do you actually rectify it. So another thing is being able to measure a lot of things that we're experiencing. And I'll show you a tool for in a minute or so about how to actually measure safety and engagement. What when I come to work every single day and I work within this team, what's coming up for me? How do I feel? How do I think? How am I when I show up when I'm with my team? And so a lot of the ground conditions to get us from norming to hopefully performing is you start to see a lot more autonomy. You start to be able to say that whole self-organization that we like to talk about a whole lot with agile teams. It becomes, hey, I'm actually good at what I do. I'm really confident. I was hired to be an expert to do this particular skill. I can make decisions, and I can make those decisions in real safety. And it's okay that I make mistakes still. I can actually, even as an expert, I can still make mistakes. We can experience failure, we learn from that failure, and how we respond to that is that's wonderful. That gave us an opportunity to learn something at an individual level, at a team level, at an organization level. All right, as promised, a couple of tools around norming. This is one that I really like. It was offered from Michael Sohoto. He's a fellow coach. Michael's awesome. Uh, and one of the tools that I learned from him is this engagement tool, and it's just really really simple. It's just I've used it in terms of offering it up to individuals across the organization. There are times when I've offered it and said let's make this as anonymous as possible. So I've literally like printed it out, put it on folks' desks, and said, hey, drop it off in this Dropbox in a more discreet location of the building. I got to work on how to do this in a more in a virtual way. So it's been a while since I've used this one since we've all gone completely virtual. But it again, this is one of those awareness tools. And what I've offered is for leaders to actually review the results of this and then be able to engage the entire organization on, well, how do we get better? If we're at a 5 on all of these things, the conversation becomes, how do we get to a 10? What are the actionable things that we can do to get to a 10? So that it becomes again this awesome ability to be aware and then act upon the awareness that we have. Think I'm back there. All right, let's talk. We'll round out the conversation. What happens when a team performs? So one of the things that I see is that when a new person enters in, they start back at ground zero, but they can get back to high performing really really fast. And one of the reasons why is that they've got a good set of practices. They brought the new person in. Um, they've inculcated them into the team in a good safe way. And then what happens is that tend to see shifts in terms of focusing in on why we're doing things and what joy it can bring to our customers and to the team versus how much stuff did we do. That's the whole outcome versus output conversation. I'll end this with one tool that I tend to use, particularly I've used this throughout the different phases, but it's just yet another one of those awareness things. It's a team radar. I'm sure you all have seen different versions of these radars. And one of the things that I do is I think the real strength is the other questions. I chose these categories of commitments, engineering practices, engagement, alignment, processes, and tools and resources. And then I try to match good questions with each just to spark good conversations, just to spark good thoughts. And then again, as always, be able to measure it and then be able to come out for that particular team. How do we improve? So it's another version of the engagement survey that I just showed, but a little bit more targeted. I tend to use this more at the team level, and then suggest to them maybe this is a thing for you all to use at your retrospective across several retrospectives, but at least have a lot more focused, a lot more intentional way of measuring where you are. End on some takeaways. Um, Big thing that one of the things that I learned from one of my coaching mentors is what he always said was most relationships are built on assumed expectations, and that's a really dangerous place to be in. So I've used this word a whole lot. So being intentional about how we want to work together, how we want to be together, and being able to write those things down, share those things with each other, a lot of those assumed expectations fall away. And now we become a lot more focused on what we want to do, how we're going to do it with each other. And you tend to see teams become a lot more healthy that way. And then all of the normal stuff that you see with most agile teams, right? Being able to improve, continuously improve by inspecting and adapting, and then removing as many constraints as possible really, really quickly.